In the late 19th century, when the shadow of European imperialism stretched across nearly the entire African continent, one ancient nation stood defiant. Ethiopia, a land of emperors, faith, and mountains older than memory, refused to surrender its sovereignty. At a time when African kingdoms were falling one after another to colonial armies, Ethiopia prepared to resist. The Ethiopia-Italy War, culminating in the legendary Battle of Adwa in 1896, would become one of the most important events in world history, a moment when Africa proved it could defeat Europe on the battlefield. By the 1880s, Europe was engaged in what historians call the scramble for Africa. Powerful nations such as Britain, France, and Germany carved up the continent, claiming land, resources, and influence. Italy, a newly unified country hungry for prestige, arrived late to this colonial race. Desperate to prove itself a great power, Italy turned its attention to the Horn of Africa, establishing control over coastal territories that would later become Eritrea. But Italy's ambitions did not stop at the coast. Beyond the Red Sea highlands lay Ethiopia, independent, ancient, and proud. Ethiopia was not an unknown land. It was a civilization that had traded with Rome, Byzantium, and Arabia for centuries. Its emperors ruled through a complex system of regional kings, nobles, and religious authority. Christianity had taken root there long before most of Europe embraced it. Ethiopia had survived Islamic expansions, internal wars, and foreign threats. Independence was not a dream, it was a tradition. At the heart of Ethiopia's resistance stood Emperor Menelik II. Born Saleh Mariam, Menelik was a ruler of vision and patience. Unlike European caricatures of African kings, Menelik understood diplomacy, modern warfare, and global politics. He negotiated with European powers, imported modern weapons, and unified Ethiopia's regions through alliance rather than force alone. Menelik knew that war with Italy was coming, and he prepared Ethiopia for that inevitable confrontation. In 1889, Italy and Ethiopia signed what appeared to be a diplomatic agreement, the Treaty of Wuchale. Written in both Italian and Amharic, the treaty contained a critical difference. The Italian version claimed Ethiopia was required to conduct all foreign relations through Italy, effectively turning Ethiopia into a protectorate. The Amharic version stated that Ethiopia may use Italian assistance if it wished. When Italy announced to Europe that Ethiopia was now its colony, Menelik II rejected the claim immediately. Ethiopia would not be ruled by deception. Italy responded with threats, pressure, and eventually military action. Convinced of European superiority, Italian leaders believed Ethiopia could be conquered quickly. They underestimated Ethiopian unity, leadership, and determination. What Italy saw as a colonial expedition, Ethiopia recognized as a fight for survival. As tensions escalated, Menelik issued a historic call to arms. Messengers rode across mountains and valleys, summoning warriors from every corner of the empire. Oromo cavalry, Amhara infantry, Tigrayan fighters, and southern allies answered the call. Nobles, peasants, and priests stood side by side. Never before had Ethiopia mobilized such a massive force in defense of independence. Among the most powerful figures in this mobilization was Empress Taitu Betul, wife of Menelik II. Intelligent, politically sharp, and fiercely patriotic, Taitu strongly opposed Italian expansion from the beginning. She helped organize logistics, advised military strategy, and commanded respect among the troops. The war against Italy was not only led by men, it was shaped by a woman whose legacy remains central to Ethiopian history. Italy began its invasion from Eritrea in late 1895, advancing into northern Ethiopia. Early clashes revealed that Ethiopian forces were not disorganized or weak. They fought with discipline, knowledge of terrain, and growing confidence. Menelik avoided rushing into battle, instead allowing Italian forces to stretch their supply lines while Ethiopian numbers grew. By early 1896, the two armies moved toward the mountainous region near the town of Adwa. The terrain was unforgiving: steep hills, deep ravines, and narrow passes. Ethiopian forces knew the land intimately. Italian commanders, relying on flawed maps and poor intelligence, planned a risky night maneuver, hoping to surprise the Ethiopians and force a decisive engagement. On the night of February 29, 1896, Italian columns moved silently through the darkness. The plan quickly fell apart. Units became separated, communication broke down, soldiers lost their way in the mountains. As dawn approached, Ethiopian scouts detected the movement. Menelik and his generals realized the moment had come. On March 1, 1896, the Battle of Adwa began. As the sun rose over the highlands, Ethiopian forces surged forward. What followed was not chaos, but coordination. Ethiopian commanders directed massive troop movements across the battlefield. Italian units, isolated and overwhelmed, fought desperately, but without cohesion. Ethiopian warriors advanced with rifles, spears, and shields, supported by artillery captured or purchased from Europe. The belief that Africans could not fight modern war collapsed under the weight of reality. By midday, the Italian army was in full retreat. Thousands were killed or captured. Generals abandoned their positions. Italy had suffered one of the most humiliating defeats in colonial history. When the smoke cleared, Ethiopia stood victorious. Against all expectations of the colonial world, an African nation had defeated a European empire in open battle. The victory at Adwa was more than military; it was symbolic. It shattered the myth of European invincibility and sent shockwaves across Africa, the Caribbean, and the African diaspora. For Ethiopia, Adwa secured independence. For Africa, it became a beacon of hope. For the world, it marked a turning point that could never be erased. After the dust of battle settled on the mountains of Adwa, the scale of Italy's defeat became undeniable. More than 6,000 Italian soldiers lay dead, thousands more were wounded, and nearly 2,000 were captured. Entire regiments had been destroyed. Modern weapons, European training, and colonial confidence had failed completely. For the first time in the age of high imperialism, a European power had been crushed by an African army in a decisive, open confrontation. The psychological impact of this defeat was immense. For Emperor Menelik II, victory did not lead to reckless revenge. Instead, he demonstrated political wisdom. He treated prisoners according to diplomatic norms and avoided unnecessary humiliation of Italy. Menelik understood that Ethiopia's survival depended not only on battlefield success, but also on international recognition. His goal was not to destroy Italy, but to force it and the world to acknowledge Ethiopian sovereignty. The defeat shook Italy to its core. News of Adwa reached Rome like an earthquake. The Italian public was stunned. The government collapsed. Protests erupted in major cities. Italy, which had hoped to join the ranks of powerful colonial empires, instead became a symbol of humiliation. Adwa exposed the dangers of imperial arrogance and racial assumptions that had shaped European colonial thinking. In October 1896, Italy was forced to sign the Treaty of Addis Ababa. This treaty formally recognized Ethiopia as a fully independent state and canceled the deceptive Treaty of Wuchale. For the first time in modern history, an African nation forced a European power to legally recognize its sovereignty after a military defeat. Ethiopia entered the 20th century as a free empire in a colonized continent. But the meaning of Adwa went far beyond Ethiopia's borders. Across Africa, the Caribbean, and the African diaspora in the Americas, the victory became a source of inspiration. For people living under colonial rule or racial oppression, Adwa proved that resistance was possible. Ethiopia became a symbol of black dignity, strength, and independence. The name Ethiopia itself gained powerful spiritual and political meaning. In Africa, Adwa slowed European expansion and forced colonial powers to rethink their strategies. While colonization continued elsewhere, Ethiopia's victory challenged the idea that African societies were weak or incapable of modern statehood. African leaders studied Adwa carefully, seeing it as proof that unity, preparation, and leadership could challenge imperial forces. In the African diaspora, especially among black intellectuals and activists, Adwa became legendary. Writers, pastors, and political thinkers spoke of Ethiopia as a beacon of hope. Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, and later Pan-African leaders pointed to Adwa as evidence that black people could govern themselves and defeat oppression. Ethiopian flags appeared at black freedom gatherings thousands of kilometers away from Africa. Within Ethiopia itself, the victory strengthened national identity. Adwa was remembered as the triumph of one ethnic group or region, but as a collective achievement. Oromo cavalry, Amhara infantry,
Tigrayan commanders, southern allies, women, priests, and peasants had all contributed. This unity, forged under existential threat, became one of the most powerful lessons of the war. Empress Taitu Betul's role gained legendary status. She had opposed Italy from the beginning, warned against European deception, and encouraged resistance when others hesitated. During the campaign, she helped command troops and protect supply routes. Her leadership challenged European stereotypes not only about Africans, but also about African women. Taitu remains one of the most influential female leaders in African history. Militarily, Adwa shattered the myth that European technology guaranteed victory. Ethiopia had modern rifles, artillery, and a command structure that combined traditional authority with adaptability. Menelik had purchased weapons from multiple European suppliers, ensuring no single power controlled Ethiopia's arsenal. This strategic foresight played a decisive role in the outcome. Yet Adwa did not mean the end of Ethiopian challenges. Internal divisions, modernization pressures, and future foreign threats remained. Decades later, Italy would return under fascist rule in 1935, temporarily occupying Ethiopia. But even then, the memory of Adwa fueled resistance. It reminded Ethiopians and the world that occupation was not destiny. Today, the Battle of Adwa stands as one of the most important events in African and global history. It is remembered not only as a military victory, but as a triumph of sovereignty, intelligence, and unity over domination and deception. It represents a moment when history changed direction, when the colonized defeated the colonizer. Adwa teaches a timeless lesson. Power is not defined by race, technology alone, or imperial ambition. Power comes from unity, leadership, preparation, and belief in freedom. That lesson continues to echo far beyond the mountains where Ethiopian warriors once stood their ground.